It is the appointed time and a quorum is present. We shall begin the meeting of the Bills Committee on Employment and Retirement Schemes Legislation Offsetting Arrangement Amendment Bill 2022. This is the second meeting. Before we move on to the agenda proper, I would like to remind members that during the course of the remote meeting, members have to switch on the video function of Zoom and show a colored background, maintain the video function switched on and show your face. For EC subsector orange, FC members green, and GC members purple backgrounds. Members and other participants present must be within Hong Kong territory when joining the remote meeting. So now we will move on to item 1, meeting with administration. Please refer to the papers issued, or rather the agenda as at the 28th of March. I welcome the officials with us today. We have Mr. Sun, Director of Labor, and Ms. Zhang from the Labor Department, and also Chief Ms. Terence Zhang, Assistant Director, and also Senior Draftsman, Mr. Ng, and Government Senior Counsel, Ms. Ho. Welcome to our meeting today. On the previous meeting, on the 18th of March, members raised certain concerns. They are set out on paper number CB-2 164 2021 -01 and 02. 02 is the written reply from the administration. That's a CB-2 164 2022 -02. So there are 2 points. First, the cost implication on business enterprises on the abolition of offsetting arrangements. Second, the government's fallback plan in order for the offsetting arrangements to be implemented by year 2025. First, I will invite the Commissioner for Labor to brief us on the government's reply, and then we invite the questions from members. Commissioner, please walk us through the reply. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. The paper was issued earlier on yesterday concerning the questions raised by members at the previous meeting, which require follow-up information. First, the cost to the impact on business cost, as well as the impacts on enterprises. Last time we promised that we would discuss the issue with our government economist. As mentioned in our reply, for business operation, according to the data provided to us by the government economist, the business environment is very stable. Wage bills account for around 35% of the total operating expenses of enterprises. That's about 1/3. And every year, the offsetting sum for year 2019 only constitutes around 0.5% of the sectoral wage bill on average. So the percentage is around 0.5%. So the offsetting amount accounts for some $900 billion in total. Every year, some $5 billion was offset, accounting for 0.5%. Bear in mind that the wage bills only account for 1/3 of the total expense. The ratio is really low and it is manageable by businesses. And also the change is not abrupt. We will adopt a gradual approach. Only the pre-transition part can be offset. And also the government will offer a subsidy scheme totaling $33.2 billion lasting 10 years to help enterprises to cope. So we reckon that the impact on business operation would be minimal. Second, there was concern whether the additional cost would be transferred to consumers and resulting in inflation. As we have explained in the reply, long service payments and severance payments, that is SP and LSP, accounts for a minimal amount, and also there is a basket of factors behind price decision. So we think the impact on inflation would be very small. And also last time as the meeting, members were concerned whether we could implement the offsetting arrangements by year 2025. As we have explained, we would ideally make use of the MPF platform to implement the offsetting arrangements. That would be the most ideal arrangement. Also, we have a fallback plan. If the eMPF platform is not ready by year 2025, we have a fallback plan. Maybe not as ideal, but the offsetting arrangements will be implemented by year 2025 anyway. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Now we will take questions from members. Concerning the reply, that is the reply on the cost on businesses as well as the timetable for implementation by year 2025. If you have any question for the administration, please raise your hands on Zoom. And I will count the number. So far, 3 members. Since this meeting is conducted in a fully remote manner, I will allocate 4 minutes, including questions and answers. When your time is almost up, we will show a clock. We will display a clock on the screens for time management. 3 members: Mr. Peter Shiu, Mr. Chow Siu Chong, and Mr. Bill Tang. Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, Chair. Now, the government's replies, that is paper CB brackets 2164 2022 brackets 02. The paper is only a 2 pages thin. This is a very important bills committee. I wonder why, Commissioner, you only give us a 2-page reply. Commissioner. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Peter Shiu, for your question. Indeed, this is a very important issue to analyze the policy change, the policy changes impact on business operation as well as inflation. What we need to look at is the macro statistics, but we have visited it with the government's economist. When we look at the percentage of LSP and SP in the total operating expenses and in wage bills, well, there are many things giving rise to economic developments, and there is also GDP and the inflation rate. So we are discussing the macro data here. If Mr. Peter Shiu would like to look at it in a more micro manner, we welcome it. However, the bill has we have conducted consultation on the bill for many years. The only change this time is abolishing the offsetting arrangements by using the employer's monetary contribution to offset the LSP and SP. So we are just providing the macro data for members to assess the possible impacts. Thank you. Commissioner, I have been a Legislative Council member for the 6 consecutive years. I have been in many bills committee. For important bills, the administration and departments would reply us in detail if they attached importance to them. This bill has a far-reaching impact on Hong Kong. Now, you said so much and you only gave us a 2-page reply. Last time I asked you, say, the employers are contributing some $4 billion per year, and for 8 years it would be hundreds of billions of dollars, and you haven't answered me. And also, whether this would cause employees to invite the employers to fire them. TVB also reported the concern, and you haven't answered me. Now, this is the epidemic. I understand maybe you are too busy to give us an answer. Just tell us. Chair, Presidency has said fighting the epidemic is the overriding concern. Now, under the epidemic, the government is putting this important issue on the table, and the Labour Department only gave us 2-page in reply. I would definitely not support it. Second question. I asked about the data, the statistics last time. Now, every year, the employers are making a contribution of 5%, equivalent to some $44 billion. So 25 years would mean some $800 billion. Some trade unions have put forward their views. Now, the government is only subsidizing some $33.2 billion. It is equivalent to less than 5% of the total cost. So this new plan is supposed to protect the employees. And now the employer has to pay out of their own pockets. So is it fair, Commissioner? Mrs. Shiu? This question may be relevant to the framework of the bill. So maybe the Commissioner can answer later. Now, after the improved electoral system, we only have 15 members in this Bills Committee. In previous legislative terms, for Bills Committee, members would be allocated unlimited time to put forward their view. They could have 15 minutes at least, at the very least, and to put forward their views. Now, there are many members in this term, so maybe you are keeping a tight hold on time. Now, my question, now I'm being interrupted and I have to wait for the next turn. I wonder if it is the most efficient way to go. Actually, we have we don't have many members in this Bills Committee, so maybe you should allow enough time for every member to ask questions. I will definitely give you sufficient time, Mr. Peter Shiu. If there aren't many members raising their hands, I will definitely give you more time. Last time we were discussing the policy issues. We haven't reached there yet today. We are just dealing with the letter. So I want to focus on the 2 points mentioned in the letter. After that, we will pick it up from last time concerning the policy issues, and then you will be able to ask the questions just now. So this may be, it may be better to focus on the 2 points on the letter first.
Chairman, well, the first point is exactly what I'm asking about the subsidy scheme, totally 33.2 billion. I'm not deviating from the 2 questions. You take a look at the paper. It's exactly what I was asking about. But that's all right. You can allow another member to speak first. I will ask you second round. Next to speak is Mr. Zhao Xiuchong, and then next Mr. Tan Ka-pyu. Mr. Chow, please. Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, in your response you've given us, I would like to follow up on a point. In case the EMPF platform is delayed, you would still have a fallback plan. Can you tell us more about the fallback plan? How would you implement it, or what kind of plan would it be? Are you going to put it in legislation? How do you ensure that the EMPF platform, in case of any delays, would still be able to be carried forward in a different manner? Commissioner. Thank you. Regardless of the progress of the EMPF platform, we want to fully abolish the offsetting arrangement by 2025. Through this platform, it will be most cost effective and most efficient in the offsetting of the arrangement. But nobody can guarantee that we'll be able to ensure the EMPF platform be fully implemented by 2025. It is actually a process to have the EMPF platform being implemented fully by 2025. The 14 MPF trustees would gradually start moving to the platform starting in 2023. There are 2 years in which they could migrate gradually to the EMPF platform. We would observe the progress. So when the first batch of trustees start to transition into the EMPF platform and we see there are hindrances, then we would think of how to carry this forward. A fallback plan would not be as ideal as the EMPF platform, but we would ensure that the over 1 million employees and 30,000 employers would be able to be fully moved to the EMPF platform. Commissioner, I do not want you to wait till problems arise in 1 year, because then we're not looking at a fallback plan. We need to make plans in advance and not to wait till issues arise before we come out with plan B, because by that time it'll be too late. I hope that you would start looking into that from this moment. Maybe I haven't been clear enough. Mr. Chow is correct. We are already working on it, on how to formulate the legislation. We're looking into whether we need to invest heavily at this current moment. We still need to observe the progress, but our views are actually similar. Mr. Tan Ka-pyu, and then next Mr. Lee Chen-kung. Thank you. I think this is the third term of LegCo dealing with the offsetting arrangement. Last year, if I remember correctly, the panel on manpower had over 100 pages of papers on the progress and the different options considered. Now we are moving into the most crucial stage at the Bills Committee stage, when we need to iron out all the details. We'll need to push forward the legislation. We don't want to not meet the expectations of the public. We are looking into meeting an operational target and to let members have a better understanding of the bill. In the first meeting, I asked Commissioner a question, hoping the Commissioner will be able to tell both employers and employees that early dismissal would bring or would incur more losses. Do you have any more examples to share with us? Otherwise, employers might think it more cost-effective to dismiss their employees before this legislation comes into place. Could you also put it down on paper clearly so that it would not bring any detrimental effects when the legislation is passed? I understand that many members have concerns and they represent different sectors. I want to allow members to be able to speak their views freely and to express the concerns of all stakeholders. But I would also keep an eye on the progress. I don't want to see too many repetitive questions. While we are carrying out a positive and productive meeting, well, some members may worry that I'm trying to rush this, but I am not. I want everyone to be able to alleviate all your concerns. On the second question, can the Commissioner address it, please? Yes, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Tang. We have given many different examples. Well, all of it could be offsetted before the effective date. Well, let's say an employee has worked for over 20 years and he is receiving about 22,500 and the maximum payment of SP and LSP would be 390,000. So these could all be offsetted. If you're worried that you need to pay that, then the employer can dismiss that employee and hire a new employee. But then that means you have to calculate it all over again. The employee would not be able to have this SP and LSP offsetted then. But if you remember, the maximum payment of SP and LSP is actually 390,000. Or for employers who really want to calculate this very clearly, there is actually no benefits to the employer for dismissing the employee early because it could not be offsetted. And even with the abolition of the offsetting arrangement, the maximum payment and the rate of the SP and LSP remains unchanged. Well, we're willing to give more samples with employees with different years of service. But no matter how many years of service, it is still better for the employer to keep the employee for longer than to dismiss the employee early. Next, Mr. Chiu Ka-fai. I want to follow up on my previous question to the Commissioner. So we're talking about 44.5 billion contributed by employees each year. So if we use 25 years, so we are talking about 800 billion in total. So that would be borne by the employers. And the government subsidy would only be 33.2 billion. So that means it's less than 5%. So how do you interpret that, Commissioner? Well, I can share with you a few figures. The 900 billion is about total wages given each year, but then you have to understand that there's actually a max for contribution. Right now, it's about 30,000. So if it's above 30,000, if I remember correctly, we're talking about 600 billion. So the 5% of mandatory contribution amounts to about 30 billion, but not all of it would be used for offsetting. You can take a look at how much is used for SP and LSP. You can look at the figure from the MPFA. In 2016, 4.6 billion was used for offsetting, and in 2015-20, it's 5.7 billion, and in 2021, it's about 6.6 billion used for offsetting. But we're only talking about 1/6 of the 30-odd billion each year. So we need to look into the ratio of mandatory contributions used for offsetting. We'll talk about 5 billion. In 2016, it's about 3.8 billion. But we're still talking about an average figure about 5 billion per year. It's not 30 billion. Now that's why we say that in 25 years, the subsidy would total around 33.2 billion. And we currently look at two figures, the 5 billion made by mandatory contributions of employers, and then the subsidy given by the government. So we're talking about a huge lump sum to help employers transition to a new arrangement. Commissioner, well, you're talking about 5 to 6 billion per year. So we will be talking about over 100 billion in 25 years. But the subsidy would only total about 33.2 billion. So that's around 25%. I do not agree with your view. Let's say, so 33 billion per year for 25 years, that's around 800 billion. So let's say a company closes down, then that means that you need to dismiss all the employees, and you would need to use all that money. Let's say employees would get long service pay. So if the pay is 22,500, we're talking about 150,000 per year. So that's around 390,000 in 25 years. So that's exactly the sum that you're contributing as well. Well, so for this scheme, you're giving extra. So for those who are 65 or above, they'll be able to see the cap of 390,000. Well, we're still talking about 5 to 6 billion a year right now, but then the number is going up. So if you continue to adopt this method, then you would see more and more employees taking that, because more and more people are now enjoying the benefits of the contributions made to the MPF earlier. And then the government will be exactly the same. These 800 billion, and in 25 years, you're only paying about 33.2 billion. That's less than 5%. So that means that you are still giving the responsibility to the employer. So is that fair?
Before the Commissioner replies, I think that the question is related to policy matters already. So if you have any questions concerning policy matters and the bills, please raise your hands as well. Commissioner, please reply Mr. Peter Shield's questions. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Peter Shield. I think we should look at it this way. In the past few years, the offsetting sum under the MPF scheme can reflect the amount of LSP and SP paid each year, because the offsetting sum would reflect the amount of LSP and SP being offset with the employer's mandatory contribution. For year 2020, on average, the LSP and SP paid to each employee is some $90,000. The individual amount hasn't changed. The total amount increased because there were more employees involved. In year 2019, 52,000 employees received the payment. In year 2022, we have 64,200 employees receiving the pay. So this is a rough figure showing the number of employees receiving LSP and SP in the market each year. A total of $5 or $6 billion were paid each year. So that's the fact. So provided that the LSP and SP level remain unchanged, the amount would be roughly the same each year. And also the change after the abolition of the offsetting arrangements would be gradual, because we have the grandfathering arrangement. So for the first year 2026, only 1 year, only 1 year's worth of amount is not offsettable, and then year 2027 at 2 years. So that's the point I'm trying to make. The burden on employer would increase gradually. The government would be subsidizing the employers in a front-loading approach. More subsidy would be offered to employers during the initial period of change, when the employers have adapted and understand the concept better. Then the outcome would be more predictable, and then the employers can plan ahead for the future sum they have to pay. So that is the government's design on how to help employers. Thank you. Now, coming up, we will pick up on discussion on policy matters. So we have Mr. Lee Jin Kang, Mr. Jimmy Mr. Lam Chen Shing, Mr. Worsen, and Mr. Zhao Xiuchong. Mr. Lee Jin Kang. Thank you, Chair. Now, the Commissioner has given us some figures. We told us only $5 or $6 billion that would be spent. Now, for SMEs or micro enterprises, they would not look at this figure. So let's say if I have a friend who wants to start a company without the government subsidy, if he hires 10 employees, in 5 years' time, he will have to set aside $750,000 each year, because $15,000 for each employee times 25 years. So if the company folds up in 25 years' time, he will have to pay $1.5 million. So the profit each year for the company may only be $100,000 or so. So where will the money come from? If the company is not transferring the additional cost to consumers, where will they get the additional fund? You told us the ratio of LSP and SP, the percentage of LSP and SP only accounts for 0.5% of the total operating expenses. Well, if we are talking about 10 years, with the compounding effect, the percentage will be 28% rather than 10%. And you said the cost will not be transferred to consumers. What is the basis? Thank you. Commissioner, please. Chair, thank you, Mr. Lee, for his question. Our reply is about the overall picture. We know the amount of LSP and SP paid to employees in the labor market each year. And also we calculated the percentage of the expenses in the total operating expenses. In year 2019, the LSP and SP totaled some $4.6 billion. In that year, the total wage bills was some $900 billion. Commissioner, you are thinking from the perspective of a major corporation with thousands of employees. What about small companies? In your paper, you also said that there would be an impact on catering sector and also micro and SMEs. Well, if you don't be careful, we will lose all of our micro and SMEs. For 15 employees, you have to set aside $150,000 each year. So where will the money come from? Nobody understands your macro data. Every year, you have to pay an additional $150,000. So 25 years means $1.5 million. I'm just talking about 15 employees. May I answer, Chair? Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. May I continue? There are two calculations. First, the ratio in total operating expenses. The percentage is low. It accounts for as high as 1% of the total wage bills. So we have to consider different enterprises. For the example you quoted, 15 employees. You would be in your scenario. It would mean the company is sacking 10 employees each year. Well, the employees will leave or resign at different times. So for an individual year, because of retirements or other reasons, you may have to pay the LSP or SP. But in your scenario, you are talking about a business closure, and all the employees have to be sacked. Normally, the employees would resign or have the contracts terminated gradually. And also, there are also other costs if a business is closing. And you cannot assume that every micro or SME would fire all their staff each year. So we have to look at the turnover. Well, let's say 2020, there were 64,000 employees receiving LSP and SP. The total labor, however, was 2 million to 3 million people. So it only accounted for several percent. So the sum set aside by corporations would just be a few percentage points. So we have to talk about how many employees receive LSP or SP each year. For year 2022 or year 2019, there were some, or rather year 2022, there were 15,000 employers paying LSP or SP to 64,000 employees. So on average, every employer paid LSP or SP to 4 employees. That's the average. So you should look at the average number to arrive at the amount paid by employers each year. That is just a small sum. For whatever reason, for example, a difficulty in operation, if you have to make employees redundant. We have a fund under the PWIFB, and employees will be able to get the ex gratia fund, ex gratia payments under the from the PWIF board. Thank you, Mr. Jimmy and then Mr. Lam Sing. Thank you, Chair. I would like to address the points on PWIF fund. The government has been giving us the figure back in 2019 and 20. Now with the with the social events as well as the 2-year-long epidemic, well, the difficulties that businesses are facing cannot be compared with 2019 and 20. Sorry, the speaker is not coming through. Sorry, Mr. Jimmy, you are not coming through. You are breaking off. Not very stable. Not very good. Well, if that's the case, am I okay now? Please try again. Am I coming through? It's not very stable, but do go on. My point is, the government is using the data back in 2019 and 20 to arrive at the amount of LSP and SP paid each year. That's unrealistic. After the 2019 social incidents and the 2-year-long epidemic, the so-called unlikely scenarios, according to the commissioner, that company would fold up, is happening. Catering sector or even the professional sector, we are seeing massive closures. For example, as the fish wholesale market, 30% of the wholesalers have gone bust. So the situation is not, or the impact is not as small as mentioned by the government economists in the paper. You mentioned the PWIF. You are asking the employers to make use of the ex gratia payments to pay the employees. Well, you are talking about limited companies. For unlimited companies, for example, a store or a fashion boutique, or even a legal firm. If there are 60 employees in the legal firm, after the partners have applied for bankruptcy, then the employees can apply for the ex gratia payments under the PWIF. So are you asking the partners to go bankrupt? Sorry, the speaker is breaking off. So that is problematic in terms of the policy. Commissioner, did you catch the question? Chair, I think I catch most of the question. So from what I understand, Mr. Ng mentioned because of the epidemic, businesses are struggling. And he thinks we are only using the 2019 and 20's data, and it is not accurate. So that's the first question. On this question, in doing the calculation, the economist has made some assumptions. For example, down cycle of economy as well as external impacts. Those are the assumptions that he made. We cannot assume that what we have seen in the past few years would go on. They are once in a century phenomenon. The abolition arrangements, however, is a long-term change.
we're talking about implementation of 2025. So we do need to see the implementation of the platform. And it's actually a gradual progress. So enterprises would have time to adjust to the new transition. However, we do need to rely on statistics to estimate for the future. The latest figures we have on hand is from 2019. We know that times are difficult right now. We see a larger sum for the offsetting for SP and LSP, but we're talking about 6 billion. It's still a bit higher than the year before. We do not have the very detailed numbers right now because MPFA could only give us a general number right now. We know that there'll be a high number than 64,000. We do see that, but there's actually not a huge gap compared to that of 2019. So that's my first point. The second question I didn't hear quite clearly, but I think that Mr. Ng was talking about the protection of wages on insolvency fund, the PWIF. PWIF is targeted towards limited companies. Actually, under the PWIF, employees need to petition to court that a company is going for insolvency. And so with that petition, the PWIF would pay out. You don't have to wait. I understand members' concern for professionals such as lawyers. It's very hard for them to go insolvent because they work in partnership. The PWIF board actually handled a case for a law firm to help employees to claim their money. I just want you to understand that you don't have to wait till a company goes insolvent before receiving the money. Mr. Lam Chan Singh, please. Thank you, Chairman. We have discussed this topic on many separate occasions, and I really hope to see the passage of this bill. I do have two questions I'd like to ask the Commissioner. First, at the end of February, a circular was sent by LegCo that the passage of the bill, some employees would actually see a lower sum received. And this has not actually been written into the legislation. And I see that there is a very brief written reply, but can you clarify it with the employees, please? And the second question is that there will be a transition date, and so you need to look into two different arrangements. First is the pre-transition period. You need to take a photo of the pre-transition portion of wages. Because some of the contracts signed are not very formal, and maybe it's just a WhatsApp message asking the employee to work, and some are actually just verbal contracts. Well, verbal contracts actually are legal binding as well, but there wouldn't be much proof. I'm just concerned that the employee would still work for 8 to 10 years after the transition period. And then if you want to argue saying that that person has worked for a long time also before the transition, then it might be hard for the employee to reclaim that part. Would there be guidelines to ensure that both employers and employees would be clear about the pre and post transition portion of the wages? Thank you. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Lam. For the first question, once again, I pledge that with the abolition of the offsetting arrangement, for employees who would receive less than the original amount, the government would subsidize that part. So this is very clear. And in the second reading and third reading, we would once again make a commitment in ensuring that the government has undertaken to make up for this shortfall, because we do not want any employees to incur a loss from this change. We would make this very clear to employees when we bring this up to LegCo again. Employers must keep records of employees' wages for the previous 12 months and for 6 months after the employee has left service. But we understand that some contracts are not made formally. Therefore, with the EMPF platform being implemented, then we'll be able to cover those loopholes. Regardless of the contracts, with MPF, we'll be able to see the exact contribution made. We're talking about a maximum of 22,500. So with that figure, we'll be able to see or to know exactly how much the employee should receive in SP or LSP. Or you may ask that some figures may be unclear after 10 years. With the EMPM platform, this would not happen because the EMPF platform could resolve many such similar issues. Next, Mr. Rockchen. Chairman, at the last meeting on March 18th, we discussed the 1% contribution made by employers to the designated savings accounts. The government will introduce a 25-year subsidy scheme, but then some employers are afraid that after 9 years, the subsidy would start to go down. From the 10th year on, when an employee leaves service, then money would be taken out of the DSA. If there is insufficient amount in the DSA and with the reduction in subsidy by the government, then the employer will need to pay it out of their own pockets. And that would be very harsh on the employers, which are already under huge financial pressure. So if these SMEs run into any problems, would the government help them to make a smoother transition? Thank you. We are not yet talking about the DSA scheme in this bill, but we understand that one of the supporting measures will be the introduction of a designated savings account scheme. This will be the next step, and we will bring this up to LegCo at a later date. As Mr. Chen said, the subsidy for the first 9 years will be more to really help the MSMEs make a transition. From the first year of the new arrangement, then 1% contribution will be made. So by the 9th year, there would be about a 9% of the wages. We estimate that in general, it would be helpful, but we cannot 100% guarantee that this would be sufficient. This is a responsibility on the side of the MSMEs. The government can only try their best to support. Well, after the subsidy has operated for 5 years, we would review it to see whether minor adjustments could be made. And we pledge to do that after 5 years. Commissioner, I just want to emphasize the support to MSMEs. Medium-sized enterprises should be all right, but then for micro and small-sized enterprises, they do not have huge cash flow. It's actually very tight. A few hundred thousand may not seem much, but it's still a very huge sum to micro and small-sized enterprises. So you really need to provide more support to these smaller enterprises. Thank you for your comment. Next, Mr. Chow Siu Chong, and then followed by Mr. Xiu Ka-fai. Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioner. I still want to focus on the commencement date of the arrangement. We've heard of this offsetting arrangement for many years, and there has been huge delay in the arrangements. I went back to previous papers, and in the 2019 policy address, in one of the paragraphs, it was mentioned that this bill should be passed in that term of government. Well, we see that it's not the case. I hope that this could also be passed within my term as legislator. In the 2018 policy address, it was stated that the transition be made within 2 years of the passage of the bill. I do not understand why you need 2 years to implement it. Now we are in 2022, and we're looking into the passage of the bill within this year. Why do we still need to extend the implementation date to 3 years later? It was a commitment made in 2018. I want the Commissioner to explain why we still need to further extend it by 3 years. And regardless of the commencement date, you would still need to let the public know when you're going to announce the full implementation of the bill. 2 questions, please, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chow. We have explained many times that the most cost-effective and efficient way to abolish the offsetting arrangement would be the EMPF platform. And that's a very realistic arrangement because we're talking about 300,000 employees and then 2 to 3 million employees, and it's a mammoth task.
as you have mentioned, some employment contracts are not formally made, and sometimes oral contracts would be forgotten. With the electronic platform, many issues can be solved. That's why we say that we have to rely on the eMPF platform to implement the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. We understand that there is a concern of the timetable, whether the eMPF platform can be completed by year 2025. Well, no one can make that promise. We have the confidence. However, in the unlikely event that the platform cannot be finished before 2025, we make a solemn promise that the offsetting arrangement will be abolished by year 2025. We have a fallback plan, not as ideal, but we want to assure you that this will happen in year 2025. The Secretary for Labor and Welfare is authorized to appoint a date when the offsetting arrangements would come into effect. So as we have said in the paper, in any event, the implementation of the bill would be before by 2025. Mr. Peter Shield and Mr. Kingsley Wong, the commissioner has been talking about $850 billion in year 2025. That's my calculation, but the commissioner said that's not the correct sum. Every year we are just paying $5 to $6 billion each year. Is that what you meant, Commissioner? Yes, correct, Chair, correct. $5 to $6 billion each year. Okay, I have a table here, Commissioner. This table shows that between year 2007 and 2022, the offsetting sum is like this. You said 2020 was $5.7 billion, and year 2021 was at $6.4 billion. You are correct. Well, but back in year 2010 or 2011, the offsetting sum was $2.3 billion. In year 2007, 15 years ago, it was at $1.7 billion. So in 10 years' time, the offsetting sum has tripled. In 15 years' time, it's quadrupled. Well, this figure, do you agree, Commissioner? Chair, I thank Mr. Peter Shield for his figure. His figure is correct. But we have to understand that we only have the MPF system since 2000. If you look at year 2007, the offsetting sum accounted for a smaller proportion. Every year, the LSP and SP is stabilizing. In the initial years after the MPF scheme was implemented, the offsetting amount was lower. In recent years, 5/6 sums was offset. Well, the amount has increased from $1 billion to $2 billion to $6 billion. So in 15 years' time, the sum quadrupled. In 10 years' time, it tripled. So if this is the pace, then in 10 years' time, we may be talking about $270 or even $300 billion. So we are paying $30 billion now. So in 15 years' time, the amount will grow like this. So maybe it is like you said, that the sum will plateau at a certain point. So you have been talking about 1/6 of the total operating cost. That's the offsetting sum. I don't agree with your calculation. But within the among the $800 billion to be paid, the government is only paying for $33.2 billion, and the remainder would be borne by employers. So why are you putting all the burden on the business sector? Let's say Mr. Chan, if he chooses to retire, then it is Mr. Chan's responsibility to make plans for his retirement. So some say that besides the employee, the employer also has a responsibility. So that's why you're requiring 5% contributions from the employee as well as the employer to plan for the retirement, so 10% altogether. Under the new plan, the additional 5% will be paid by the employer. Well, besides the employers and the employees, shouldn't the community as a whole take the responsibility as well? Shouldn't the employee also make contribution for these additional 5%? If you're asking the employer to pay for the additional 5%, then and taking the burden of 90% out of the $800 billion, so is that fair? Thank you, Mr. Peter Shiu. If you look at the offsetting sum, in the initial years, the amount was smaller. The LSP and SP amount paid was stable. However, the plan only ran for several years. So let's say I have several kids. I would measure the child's height every year. So of course, he is growing every year. However, if I measure his height after 18 years old, he wouldn't grow every year. So I cannot calculate the height of the child at 80 years old by adding 3 centimeters every year. So you are telling us that every year the sum will be $5 or $6 billion each year. Are you saying that on behalf of the government? You said the sum would not, the height would not grow anymore at age 80. Well, the child's metaphor is to illustrate that the growth of the offsetting sum. For LSP and SP each year, it varies year by year. Looking at the history, it is relatively stable. We have a rough idea how many employers are paying how many employees are LSP and SP, and also the amount is kept at $390,000 and calculated on the basis of a monthly wage of $25,000. But if you look at the historical amount, the figure is rather stable. Well, Mr. Peter Shiu's question exactly shows why we have to abolish the offsetting arrangement. Because of the aging population, it is of utmost importance to plan ahead for employees' retirement. After 30 or 40 years of hard work, if the employee is only entitled to the 5% employee's mandatory contribution, it is not nearly enough to support his retirement life. If the employer's mandatory contribution of 5% can get into the pockets of the employee after the retirement, that will be of great help. We understand this is a major change for employers. That's why we have come up with the grandfathering arrangement. We understand that the employers and employees have both made concessions. But we are talking about a $33.2 billion subsidy scheme over 25 years for enterprises to adapt. I'm not saying this is enough. Well, the definition of enough varies person to person. However, the sum is substantial. Thank you. Next round, please, Mr. Peter Shiu. Mr. Kingsley Wong. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, on this policy, I think we have to talk about the cost effectiveness of the policy. Now, the abolition of offsetting arrangements will have an impact, a small impact on operating costs and inflation. On the other hand, you said the yearly contribution is some $600 billion, or rather $600 billion, and $6 billion is paid to employee. Well, if the impact is small and the benefit is great, can the commissioner give us an example after a lifetime's work on retirement after the abolition of offsetting arrangements, how much will the employee be entitled to for his retirement life? You said correctly that for the catering sector, offsetting is common. So after the abolition of the offsetting arrangements, how will a worker working in the catering sector be entitled to after the retirement? We see a lot of elderly people living on recycling paper carton boxes each day. This is unfair and unjust. So can the commissioner give us an idea by how much will the employees be benefited after the abolition of the offsetting plan? Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Wong. We will provide the data, the calculation after the meeting. We have to explain the example we give. For example, the length of service and the contribution amount. We have to make some assumptions, and including the compounded interest of the MPF scheme. Well, I'm not asking you to do the exact calculation. Just give us the rough figure. Let's say an employee earning median income after 60 years of work, how much will he get? We want to know the actual benefits for employees. So you gave us the example. If you have two sons, one working in the catering industry and one working in other industry, what will be the difference? Well, I will give you the data after the meeting. Thank you. So that's the first round of questions. Two members wish to have a second go, Mr. Lee Jun-Kang and Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, you did not answer my question head on. The abolition of offsetting arrangement has no impact on medium and large enterprises. However, it has a huge impact on micro and small enterprises. For a company hiring 10 employees in 10 years, in 15 years time, in 25 years time, they have to set aside $1.5 million. You said that you have the PWIF. Or if this is an unlimited company, will the company be held to account? You said that there would be no impact on inflation. Well, I gave you the compounded calculation. 25 years, the inflation would be some 28% if you stack 1% each year. How come it will not be transferred to the consumers? Commissioner, thank you for your question. On your second question, if you look at the total amount of RSP and SP, or rather the percentage in the total wage bills, it is just at 0.5 to 0.6%. That's the figure each year. It won't stack up every year. It's just at 0.6 to 0. It's just some 0.6% each year. You can't simply stack the percentage of each year together. In terms of the reserved amount, like Mr. Kingsley Wong mentioned, given this a percentage, the RSP and SP will only account for less than 1% in terms of the wage bills each year. For an average sized company, a similar portion will have to be set aside. You cannot assume that you will sack all the employees every year. The employer will know roughly how much RSP and SP has to be paid each year, because you know the age of the employees, and you know when you will have to pay a certain employee RSP or SP, and you can make arrangements for that. When the designated saving accounts scheme is put into place, employers will have to make a contribution of 1% each year. So that would be how employers save up.
Commissioner, I do not agree with your view. First of all, 0.5% to 0.6% for large enterprises who are always making a profit with a cap of MPF. Let's say an employee is hired at 100,000. The MPF contribution would still not be very high. But then for enterprises or small catering businesses or micro and small sized enterprises, that's always more than 0.5 to 0.6%. I also like to follow up on what Mr. Msmes said. Under the pandemic, many businesses are only trying to survive. They're not even looking for a profit. They want to continue with their business operations. They didn't think before the pandemic that they might need to close down. Well, for enterprises that are smaller, they need to set aside funding for that pay. You must try to separate large and medium-sized enterprises from the micro and smaller-sized enterprises. You must try to provide them with more subsidies. Without your support, they will not be able to make it through. You're going to totally change the ecosystem of micro and small-sized enterprises in Hong Kong. Commissioner, do you have any follow-up? Well, let me try. There may be a higher ratio of SMSEs, but then it will still not exceed 1%. We understand that MSMEs need more support. Therefore, for the government subsidy scheme for the first 9 years, and we do have a cap as long as it does not exceed 50,000. So for the beginning, the employer may only need to pay $3,000, and then the government will undertake to pay the rest with a subsidy. We understand that due to the pandemic, many businesses are suffering. We are not talking about making a new arrangement. We're talking an existing arrangement. From 2025, we are going to gradually to begin with the arrangement, but then with the government's subsidy scheme, it is especially helpful to MSMEs. This is very clear because we are providing them with targeted assistance. We have discussed this with the MSMEs. They want to ensure that they're able to set aside certain amount under the new arrangement. The government cannot make a pledge for a subsidy for the entire 25 years. So for MSMEs who are able to make an estimate very clearly in the first 9 years, it would be helpful. Well, yes, how about for those younger people who are working after that 25-year scheme? How about for the next generation? So the next generation, you will not see any MSMEs because all the MSMEs would then be acquired by the larger enterprises. You need to draw a line somewhere. Commissioner, please take note of Mr. Lee's views. Next, Mr. Chiu Ka-fai. Thank you, Chairman. The Commissioner gave us an example that by retirement, there will be an extra 5% and not be offsetted. Well, since you started on this topic, I would like to state my view as well. Let's say an employee makes a 5% contribution. The employer also makes a 5% contribution. example, for a salary of 22,500, that would be around a 5% contribution would be 15,000. So by 10 years, we're talking about 135,000. Let's say this person is dismissed. The employer would still need to pay 150,000 because that's a 10-year service time, 2/3 of the monthly pay. So the employer would need to take out 135,000 and then just to pay the $15,000. What if the employee starts work again the next day with a monthly pay of 22,500? So what difference would that make? Chairman, this is exactly the reason why we are looking into the abolition of the offsetting arrangement. In the long run, a large portion of the 5% contribution would be offsetted, and the money that could be received at retirement would only be 5%, and that's not enough. And that's exactly the reason why we are spending so much time on the abolition of the offsetting arrangement, because after 30 to 40 years of service, the employee would see the 5% volunteer contribution made by himself and then the 5% by the employer. And so there would be more protection for the employee. And that differs from the LSPSP because you will not be able to offset this in the future. Commissioner, all right, let's say a person is 20 years old, so that person has like 135,000 in the account, and then the employer has also made this 5% contribution with 135,000, and now after working for 30 years, the employee is made redundant because the company has gone insolvent. So the 5% contribution of 135,000 is still in the person's account, and then this person is only 30 years old after 10 years, and he still continues to look for a new job, and he's not looking into retirement. So you would see that this person would now get an extra 150,000. Let's say let's say there are two different employees, one with a company that has closed down, another with the company still in operation. So this person, after being released by the previous employer, goes to work for another company. So that person is only 30 years old, and now with a new job, you would see that there's an extra 150,000 in the account. Before the fifth wave of pandemic, unemployment rate was very low. Why do you always tell the public, no, that it seems that the money has just dissolved somewhere? But with the company closing down, you need to pay an extra 15,000. So that 15,000 is given to the employee to find a new job during that month. Many years ago, it was difficult for people to look for a new job after being made redundant. But nowadays, it's very easy to find a job. But if that person, because of a company closing down, will be able to receive this extra 15,000. So what is the difference with that 15,000 being in his own pocket than by being in the MPF fund? Well, of course, there is a difference. A person who has worked for 10 years at the same company and now dismissed. And so now that has been offsetted with LSP. And if this continues, by the time he's 65 years old, he would only see his own 5% contribution. he had many employers, but then most of the employer contribution has already been offsetted. So there would be less money for his retirement. This person has worked for 10 years. So now with LSP, it has been offsetted by the employer, but without being offsetted, it could be accrued continuously with the MPF, but a grassroots employee, you see that very often this LSP has already been offsetted and the accrued benefits have or profits have also seen losses because 300,000 10 years ago is different from 300,000 in money of the day. If it's continuously offsetted, by the time retirement comes, then most of the money would be gone. We are making such a huge effort in the abolition of the offsetting arrangement because we hope that that by retirement, the employee would see his own 5% contribution and also the 5% contributed by the employers. We all have the consensus that with the abolition, the calculation and arrangements would remain the same because that is the benefits under the employment ordinance. All right, so let's say this boy starts working at 20 years old and now with a contribution of 5% and the first company dismissed, and so this person continues to work with a new job, then that 150,000 is put in his own account, and then after 10 years the second company also closed down and now he also has an extra 150,000. So now he has 300,000 in his account. And now 10 years later, the third company closed down. And so this person will now have like 450,000 in the account. So within these 30 years, so in his account, there's about accrued amount of 405,000. If he continues to work for that same company, then it would be offset, but because but now because of leaving for another company, he now has 405,000 extra money in his account. Or for MPF, you know, sometimes you see profit, sometimes you incur losses. So how do you know how the person is going to spend the 405,000? Well, that person can continue to make investment. So don't say that, you know, it would be you would be accruing money because you might not actually be making profit. But if that person is looking into early retirement, then you will still see the time. People keep on saying the offsetting arrangement. If you just put it in your own account, we're talking about 405,000 only. So I don't understand why you say that it is sad or upsetting for them. I think you're starting to repeat yourself here. No, I'm not repeating my view. I'm very clearly making an argument here, the fundamental principle. He's still not able to provide me with an answer. I'm not trying to repeat my view. We haven't made clear the fundamental principle because I really don't think how you're going to help people with that. Well, you know, you're repeating question because you're not satisfied with his answer. I'll now see if the commissioner has anything to add. If you're not happy or you're not satisfied with the answer, you know, there is nothing I can do about that. Well, that's all right, Commissioner. Even if you're not able to provide me with an answer, that's all right. Well, so tell me, what's the difference? Commissioner, do you have anything to add? Well, I'm happy to address Mr. Xiu's question because we're going back to the crux of the matter. Why do we need to abolish the offsetting arrangement? Because we hope that when a person retires, they would see both sums of money in the account. the 5% contribution he made and the contributions made by the employers, and that would be very helpful to retirement life because it's from 5% to now 10%.
Second, during the discussion of the abolition of the offsetting arrangements, the contention centered around one point, that is, we would change the calculation of LSP and SP. There was a view that we should deduct the LSP and SP. However, there was a consensus that that was not the right way to go. So after all the discussion, we have this bill because there is a consensus that there would be no change in the calculation method of LSP and SP. We would keep the current calculation method under the Employment Ordinance. The idea is that under the Employment Ordinance, LSP and SP are the entitlements of employees, subject to fulfillment of the conditions under the Employment Ordinance, and the employees should get them. So I won't labor this point. All provisions under the bill reflects the consensus after years of discussion. Thank you. Chair, I would like to tell the commissioner that the calculation, that's the example that I gave was very clear. The employees' 5% contribution would become a $405,000 after 30 years. Sorry, it should be, yes, $405,000. If it is so unfortunate that every 10 years his company fold up and he has to leave, he will be entitled to $450,000 in his account. If he is able to get another job at the very next day, then it would have no impact on him. So the so-called offsetting, yes, he only has the 5% because the 5% of the employer becomes part of the $450,000, which is even higher than the original amount. If you're saying that the employee would lose out if he cannot find a job immediately, then I agree with you. So how long is the period in between? So if the employee is unable to find a job in 1 month's time, then we should give him the extra $15,000. If he cannot find a job beyond that, then there is unemployment as relief for them. So this bill is unnecessary because the money is all along with the employee. What we are worried about is that the employee cannot find a new job. If he is unemployed for half a year, then there should be a temporary unemployment relief, then it's fine. Both the money is there. If someone is unable to get a job for a long time, then he can apply for unemployment assistance under the security net. So, Commissioner, if you're telling me that it is to protect employees against offsetting, then I don't agree because the money is not offsetted. It is there. If you're worried about the 10% is not enough, you want to give the employee more, then I would agree with you. Of course, I want employees to have more money after retirement. If you're telling me that 10%, 5 plus 5 is not enough, then it's fine. We can think about something else. I will be convinced. I want people to have a happy retirement life because I don't think the 2 portions of the money is enough. So that's not a valid point if you are talking about the offsetting arrangement. Now the DSD and the designated saving account, there is a 1% contribution. Chair, there are no other members, right? So please, I want to ask questions as well. So Chair, I will let you have a go first. I will invite other members to ask questions first. So members, are there any more questions concerning the principles of the bill? If there's not, then I will allow Mr. Peter Shield to ask questions again. So please don't repeat your points. Thank you, Chair. Now, on the 1% contribution to the account. many people don't follow what's happening in this meeting. So in 25 years' time, the employers will be paying up for the $800 billion. So the government's contribution of $33.2 billion is not enough. Now the commissioner is telling us that every year we are just paying $5 to $6 billion per year. So his implication is that not all the $30 billion are used for offsetting. Every year is just 1/6 of the amount. That is $5 to $6 billion. So that is equivalent to the 1% plus the 5% of the MPF each year. Then that would cover it. Is that what you mean, Commissioner? So that question was covered by Mr. Lee Jin-Kung. The Commissioner has answered. No, Mr. Lee Jin-Kung's question was different. How he arrived at the $5 to $6 billion out of the $30 billion. So that's 1/6. Under the bill, we are asking the employers to pay the additional 1% beyond the 5%. So will that cover the cost? That's my question. So you only need to pay 1/6 of the $30 billion. So the 6% would be enough. Is that the point? Thank you, Mr. Peter Shiu, for your question. The bill has no effect on the designated savings account. The purpose of this bill is very simple. That is to abolish the offsetting arrangement after the transition date. The employer's monetary contribution cannot be used to offset the post-transition portion of FSP and SP. So this is the arrangements for employees whose service term spans across the pre and post transition date. We all understand that if the offsetting arrangement is implemented, or rather the abolition is implemented, in the future, the employers can no longer use the employer's contribution to offset the LSP and SP. That's the major change. So the employers have to calculate it themselves. For the post-transition part, how can I provide for that portion of the LSP and SP, and what will the amount be? That's why under the government subsidy plan, we will subsidize more in the initial period, because we understand that corporations have to make plans. We know a medium to large size companies can adapt to it easier. It would be more difficult for small and micro enterprises. So we want to provide more subsidies to micro and small companies. There will be a cap, and the remainder would be borne by the government. So for the first 3 years, the employers only need to pay a maximum of $3,000, and the government will bear the remainder of the cost. So Mrs. Shiu's question about the extra 1%, will it cover it? But roughly speaking, for year 2019, LSP and SP accounted for about 1% of the total operating expenses, and that's not the total wage we are talking about. We are just talking about the relative income under the MPF scheme. If your monthly wage is lower than $30,000, then there will be a cap. So that is equivalent to $600 billion each year. In year 2019 and 20, every year LSP and SP only amounted to $6 billion. So just 1%. So if we are worried about employers who do not save up for the amount. So next step will be setting up designated saving accounts. If employers save 1% each year, it will be very likely that they can afford the LSP and SP. That's the direction for the specific provisions. After, subject to the passage of this bill, we will hammer out the detail. This bill, however, has nothing to do with the designated saving account. this bill is about abolishing the offsetting arrangements where employers can offset the SP and SP with their contribution. Thank you. Chair, I don't quite follow why the commissioner is separating the two things. Maybe from a legal point of view, it is different, the designated saving accounts and EMPF. But how can we not talk about it when we are talking about abolishing the offsetting accounts, offsetting arrangements? How much will employers have to pay? Well, let's leave it for later. We cannot do that. This has a huge impact on labor employers relationship. So my question is simple. Every year, employers are paying some $30 billion, and that is the 5% contribution from employers. Every year, you tell us every year $5 to $6 billion are being offsetted. So let's compare apple to apple. Otherwise, the public or the media cannot follow. So the proportion is 1/6. So with this abolition, you're asking the employers to contribute 1% to the account. So you may be able to convince some people. Every year you are paying $30 billion. However, not the entirety of the sum is spent on offsetting. So just $5 to $6 billion each year. So you should just contribute 1% each year instead. That's how you convinced some people in the business sector. I have an opinion on this principle. Now, this table is the increase of MPF in the past 15 years. Since year 2007, the amount was at $1.7 billion. In 15 years' time, it quadrupled. In 10 years' time, it tripled. So if the trend continues, it will continue to multiply. So if you want to convince me that the 1% is enough, well, let me give you a counter example. Let's say I have one employee who makes $22,500 per month. I contribute 1% for him. That's $225. 1 year is equivalent to $2,700 from me. In 10 years' time, I will have contributed at $27,000 for him. That's one employee. If I have 10 employees, given that the wage is the same, I will have paid up $270,000. That's the sum in my saving account. If I continue operation, then if the employees don't leave me, then it's fine. In 10 years' time, if I fire an employee for whatever reason, I have to pay him. So the wage, $22,500, 2/3 of the last month's wage. That means $150,000. The government will subsidize me. So after 10 years, you will pay 20% out of the first $500,000. So I will have to pay $120,000 in the end. So you are paying $30,000. I pay $120,000, and I have $270,000 in the account. So I get $120,000 to pay, and then it's fine. Then I have $150,000 left in my account. However, if we have 3 employees leaving, then it will not be sufficient. I will have to pay $90,000 out of my own pocket. In 10 years' time, if I close my company, 10 employees, $150,000 per each, times 10, it means $1.5 million. I only have $270,000 in my saving account. So where will the remainder come from? For the first $1 million, you will subsidize 20%. So I pay $400,000 for the first 20%. So the government will only pay 15%, and I will have to pay 85% for the $1 million. So altogether, $125,000. However, I only have $270,000 in my account. I have to pay another $980,000 on my own. Is that right?
Before the commissioner answers, let us look at some housekeeping. Mr. Lee Chen-Kung has also raised his hand. I also want to see whether any members would like to speak in relation to this topic. How many more questions do you have, Mr. Xiu? Or I still have a whole bunch of questions, but I can let Mr. Lee ask first because I want the general public to understand what is happening. A majority of the business sectors do not know what's happening. Well, on the 4th day of the Chinese Lunar Year, you put this up, you announce this and then nobody knows what's happening. Well, we had a meeting in Chimsha together with the business sector earlier on, but then nobody knows what's really happening. Well, can we just pretend that this never happened and then just to pass it with our eyes closed? Well, I'm not being personal here. I just want to try to clear up the matter. All right, that's okay. You know, can continue to ask questions, but please do not repeat your questions. Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Xiu. We have talked about the abolition for many, many years. The business sector, the labor sector have both had ample time to discuss this. It's not something new. We have discussed the optimization of the scheme because we want to especially help MSMEs. Mr. Xiu has given us many figures on the designated savings accounts calculation. Well, today we are not actually focusing on the DSA. However, when we talk about 1% contribution, then your figures are basically correct. In the future, we will focus on the discussion of DSA. The money in the DSA is actually money from the employers. We propose the introduction of a DSA scheme so that employers will be mandated to save up for meeting their liabilities. If everyone agrees, then a certain percentage would be mandated each year, and that basically would be able to meet future SP or LSP liabilities, but that could not cover all. As Mr. Xiu said, if I decide to just dismiss all employees and to close down my company, of course, that would not be sufficient. But under the law, the employers has the responsibility to pay SP and LSP. The designated savings account scheme is not to cover that. The government is not subsidizing the DSA. The government is only subsidizing the transitional period. But for DSA, the money belongs to the employer. We're just afraid that some employers do not know how to save up, and that's why we made it a mandatory savings scheme. And the money belongs to the employers, not to the government. I just hope that you understand this concept clearly. The DSA is to help the the subsidy will be in place to help support MSMEs in the early transitional period. Because with the abolition of the offsetting arrangement, you'll not be able to use the contribution to offset the LSP and SP. Commissioner, I'm just trying to address his reply. You do not have to comment on his answer. Well, please do not just keep cutting me off, because otherwise I would need to continue asking my questions, and that would take a very long period of time. Well, yes, at this moment, I understand the liabilities from employers, but the MPFA is actually taking care of such needs. With this new bill, we do already have an existing arrangement. However, what you're talking about is actually after this. We do have an existing arrangement taking care of SP and LSP. You're now just adding on extra subsidy or extra support. Please do not continue or repeat your questions, because we have heard many repetitive answers already. Mr. Lee Chun-kung. Thank you, Chairman. The commissioner said that in 2019 or 2020, not too many companies applied for insolvency or closed down. But we didn't know that the pandemic would be so severe, nor did we know there would be a fifth wave. We don't even know whether there would be a sixth wave or whether there would be a more serious pandemic in the future. When we encounter such obstacles, what would the MSMEs do? I would like to just give you a figure, Commissioner. You said that not many companies closed down. Well, just let me talk about the catering sector. Last year in 2021, about 30,000 eateries closed down. In March, we see that 3,000 restaurants have suspended operations temporarily, and about 400 have closed down. And by the end of April, 7,000 would have suspended operations, and 2,500 would have ceased their operations. So we're talking about 1/3 of the restaurants or eateries being closed down or about to close down. So where would the severance pay come from? Well, you suggest we use the PWIF, but then we're only talking about 6.3 billion at this moment. So if with all this money is used up, then where would the rest of the money come out from? Would the government be subsidizing that as well? Facing with natural disasters and other crises, what would the government be doing in terms of subsidizing the sector? Well, you're actually repeating your question. You're just focusing on the catering industry at this moment. All right, so how would the government look into helping MSMEs when faced with natural disasters? Commissioner, we understand that many businesses are suffering under the pandemic. However, we cannot presume that every year would be the same. We are just talking about regular years when there are no major issues. Enterprises in Hong Kong are able to bear this because we're talking about less than 1% a year. Although the PWIF has nothing to do with what we're discussing today, I do hope to touch on that. Businesses, when registering for their licenses, would need to pay $450 and that is where the PWIF come from. So we are talking about a few hundred millions of dollars in the PWIF. Well, currently we do have a surplus of about 6.3 billion. Well, I do not have the specific figure, but then we will be telling you more about the PWIF at a later date. After the abolition of the offsetting arrangement, the employers would be responsible for paying SP and LSP. However, if they are not able to do that, the employees would not receive that money. We do have a safety net, which is the PWIF. Even with the abolition, the PWIF will still cover enough protection, and we would share with you at our next meeting the PWIF. I would extend the meeting to allow Mr. Shiu Ka-fai to ask one more question, then we would adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Well, in the last meeting, I mentioned the point of employees deliberately seeking dismissal. Now, this is something most concerned with. At this current moment, there is a good relationship between employers and employees. They do not need to argue about contributions, because the 5% contribution goes directly into the employee's account. The employer will never be able to take that away from the employees. Or let's say the employee has been dismissed, the money would still be given, would still stay with the employee. When the employee looks for a new job, even if that person works for over 5 years, the employer would still take this out of the employee's contribution, and there's nothing in it for the employees. Let's say there's a 135,000 in the employee's account. Even if the employer dismisses that person, there would still be nothing for the employer because they still need to pay 150,000. When the employee leaves on his own initiative, that 135,000 would still be taken away by the employee. It has nothing to do with the employer. However, with the passage of this bill, then everything would be different. The employer continues to make a contribution, but when the employee, after this comes into place, if he leaves on his own initiative, then he will not be able to take away any money. But then if he's dismissed, then he will be able to receive 150,000. And that's the most concerning part. Or let's not look into the figure of whether it's 150,000 or 225,000. Let's just talk about the $15,000. An employee who has worked for over 5 years, 2/3 of 15,000, it's already 30,000. So that's already, so that person, as long as he has worked for over 5 years and he is dismissed and he go work for another company, he'll be able to get $50,000 as extra. Well, what would he need? The old employer to write a reference letter. If not, then the new employer would not know that this person has been dismissed. I want to ask the commissioner whether this would really happen. And secondly, let's say this person starts working for this company since he was 20 and has worked for 26 years. So he was able to save 150,000 with a 22,500 monthly salary. And if he leaves, then no, that's another matter. If he's dismissed, he can still work for another company because he's still only 46 years old and he can work for another 19 years and get on. But we're not going to go into that right now. This person now at 46 years old already has $390,000 in savings, and he thinks that after retirement, the employer would give him the contribution. But then if that person leaves on his own initiative, he would not be able to take this $390,000 away. Or if that person said he's going to retire, he's going to immigrate, then this 390,000 will still be left with the employer, and then the employer might try to deliberately do something or behave in an appropriate manner to make the employee unhappy, so that the employee would leave on his own initiative, because then he would be able to save the $390,000. Have you thought about that scenario?
Commissioner, please. Thank you, Chen. Thank you, Mr. Peter Shiu. I believe the scenario mentioned by Mr. Peter Shiu, the question is whether the abolition of the offsetting arrangements would worsen the employer-employee relationship in Hong Kong. Yes, that's my point. As the previous meeting, I said that we all remembered we had LSP and SP back in the 80s and 90s, and we didn't have MPF back then. In the 90s, was the relations between employer and employee bad? No, it was quite harmonious. Of course, there are extreme examples. In the labor market, most employers are scrupulous, and most employees want to do a good job. They wouldn't be doing a simple calculation that they can get the LSP by getting themselves fired. Well, if their behaviors are in breach of the employment ordinance, then they will get nothing. And also, if you work more than a decade in a company, and there will be a lot of attachments to the company. They won't simply break off the relations with the employer. And also, you need to fulfill a certain term of service to get the LSP. After the abolition, there will be more. We expect that there will be more contention about LSP and SP, and the Labor Department is ready to mediate. I don't agree, however, that the abolition will worsen the employer-employee relationship in Hong Kong. There are simply too many factors affecting the relationship between employer and employees. Employees are the greatest access of employers. I'm not saying the scenario you gave is impossible. However, it is very extreme. It is exactly because LSP is offsetted by the contribution, then it is very difficult to retain employees. If employees choose to stay, then they will get the LSP, and it is more beneficial to them. So there are two sides to the matter. So there will be worries. However, it will also encourage good employees with an attachment to the company to stay. So I don't think there will be a drastic impact on the relationship. I know you want to adjourn the meeting. Please let me reply. Okay, please finish what you have to say. I have to reply. This is a debate. This is our job. The commissioner put forward his points, and I will put forward mine. In year 1986, we began to have LSP. MPF was discussed by the LegCo back in before year 2000, and before that we had the Providence Fund. Now in 1986, you had the long service payment. So in 5 years' time, it was implemented. That's 1991. We started debating MPF in year 1995, and in 9 years' time, we had the MPF. So the amount offsetted by under the MPF was limited. So we didn't have so many labor disputes. And back in year 1986, you would know that the wage increase was massive. So if the wage increase is so great, then we don't need the 1% contribution. I think, Commissioner, you are earning $200,000 per month. For an employee earning $15,000 per month, after 5 years of savings, they don't get as much. They have to pay for their rents and food and family members. So and with minimal wage increase, well, they would prefer the $50,000 of SP if they are fired by the employer. So besides attachments, money is a real concern as well. So you said the scenario is extreme. Well, this is the table compiled by the Census and Statistics Department. Hong Kong's wage, the median wage is $25,000. I mean, 60% of the labor force, or rather 66%, earn below $25,000 per month. So 2/3 of the labor force is earning this amount. So for the amount at $28,800, we're talking about 75% of the employees. Of course, a high earners like the commissioner would not think about this. Well, you talk about the recommendation letter from the employer to prove that they were not fired. Of course, those are not the people we are talking about. We are talking about 2/3 or more than 2/3 of the labor force. 2/3 of the 3 million people, they are earning below $20,000 per month. So you're telling me that subject to the passage of the bill, the scenario is extreme? Is that how you is that your thinking? So that's why I'm so grumpy. After the passage of the bill, the employers and the employees will only consider their own benefit. And every 4 years, employees will choose to leave. You said employees won't deliberately get themselves fired. Well, in the past few years, we have been suffering from job hopping of foreign domestic helpers. They simply have to refuse to obey orders to get themselves fired. Well, I'm not saying extreme cases like violence. Employees only need to disobey orders and refuse to move to get themselves fired. It's not difficult. You don't have to hurl abuses and use violence. Well, if my employees disobey my orders, I can do nothing. I won't even shout them. The best I can do is to ask them leave if they refuse to obey orders. However, what if the employees ask me to fire him? Thank you. So now Mr. Peter Shield has finished his 6th round, so I'm not going to allow questions anymore. From the questions and answers we heard, I found that they are getting repetitive. Not just questions, but answers as well. So for the next meeting, unless members have new viewpoints or new questions, otherwise I will be strict and close the debate on policy matters. And today, members asked some questions, and Commissioner promised to give a written reply. So please follow up on the matter after the meeting. Item 2, AOB. So I would like members to reserve the time. The next meeting will be scheduled at 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. On the 22nd of April. So please be on time next time. No AOB. Mr. Peter Shield, any question? Yes, Chair. We had the meeting just 10 days ago. So why do we have this meeting today? I thought it is once a month. The meetings that were scheduled before I became chairman. As you understand, the member with the highest precedence would set the date. So it wasn't me who set the date. So the next meeting is scheduled at late April. So please understand my difficulty. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.